All right, so I just wanted to share a great example of misinformation regarding scientific studies. And I came across this person's profile because she had commented on a clothing company that was advertising basically safer natural fibers versus products that are made from basically plastic. So there's, of course, a lot of synthetic fibers that are petroleum derived. And of course, there's, scientific studies that show that exposure to those microplastics can cause health issues. And she basically said, she commented on that advertisement, and she basically said, anything but the jabs, which was an obvious reference to the COVID vaccines. So, of course, I had to take a look at her profile and, see what type of information she was sharing. She actually referenced having a daughter whose brain was damaged by vaccines. So, of course, I searched in her profile and basically found evidence that suggested that she thinks her daughter was vaccine injured and has autism as a result of it. So, of course, many of you are probably familiar with Andrew Wakefield and that original study that supposedly showed a link between vaccines and autism, and that study had been retracted. It's very well known that that was based on fraudulent data, and the journal that originally published it retracted it. But unfortunately, that narrative really took hold, and there's still a ton of misinformation out there regarding a supposed link between vaccines and autism. So, right in her newsfeed here, she posted recently, it's a public post, "You should be livid, 45 studies linking autism to you-know-what," and she has screenshots here that show an Instagram user by the name of Science Cited. Of course, here's an AI-generated image of a baby being surrounded by people with needles, so right off the bat you see there's this image is kind of like how loaded language is used to elicit an emotional response. It looks like this innocent baby is going to be vaccinated a bunch of different times simultaneously by a bunch of different people. So it's very misleading, of course. This is not what childhood vaccination actually looks like. And then I, of course, just took a look at some of these studies, and of course the caption here says this post archives 45 scientific studies linking vaccines and autism. So I was like, okay, I'm going to randomly choose one of these. It's not truly random. I just picked number 3, Estes et al., 2015, Immune Mediators in the Brain and Peripheral Tissues in Autism Spectrum Disorder, Nature Reviews, Neuroscience. Of course, this is a screenshot, and it looks like there's actually a link here, but with it being a screenshot, I just went to Google Scholar and searched for this paper. So I found it easily. Luckily, there's a full text version. Immune Mediators in the Brain and Peripheral Tissues in Autism Spectrum Disorder. Actually, interestingly, there's only 2 authors here. So it's not really even cited correctly because they have et al. And others, which pretty much any sort of citation methodology, you're just going to list both the authors. I haven't had to cite things professionally in a while, so I could be wrong about that, but that's unusual that it's right off the bat citing like that. Anyway, so I start reading this article, reading the abstract, of course, nothing coming up with vaccines. I read down through it a little ways, and the first thing I come upon that mentions vaccines says this. So, although accumulating evidence indicates that immune dysregulation increases the risk for and contributes to the pathophysiology of ASD, aka autism spectrum disorder, this does not mean that immune responses to vaccines cause ASD. In fact, recent studies have debunked the myth of a link between ASD and early childhood vaccines. There's a citation, 13, you can follow it. Despite the unequivocal and compelling research behind the conclusion that vaccines do not cause ASD, society is increasingly at risk of preventable, devastating diseases, including whooping cough, measles, and tuberculosis, because of the unsubstantiated fear of vaccinations. For these reasons alone, it is critical to disseminate and improve our understanding of immune and environmental contributions to ASD. So I was like, wow. So basically, the authors of this study are saying essentially the exact opposite of what that science-cited person was saying. And then, of course, I Control F searched for vaccines because I wanted to find any other mention of vaccines. And the only other mention of vaccines here is that 13, that citation. And then the title of that paper is Vaccines Are Not Associated with Autism, an evidence-based meta-analysis of case control and cohort studies in the journal Vaccine. So, science-cited is BSing us. They are not citing science. The only thing that they're doing here is collecting papers from actual scientific literature and claiming that those 45 scientific studies link vaccines and autism. So I would invite anyone to find this account on Instagram and look for yourself. Do not fall victim to this pattern of assuming that because somebody posts something you agree with, that information is actually correct. The way that we as a society are going to overcome scientific illiteracy and people making poor decisions based on misinformation is to cultivate true scientific literacy standards in school and just in your personal life. You know, it does not take long to double check what information is actually being shared and seeing for yourself whether that paper or source actually contains information that aligns with what the person is saying it says. Very oftentimes it does not. So, you know, this list of these 45 papers, a lot of people who are anti-vaccine are just going to take it for granted that those papers do indeed say what this science-cited account is purporting they do. They're going to be like, oh, look at all these, you know, fancy scientific papers that supposedly are linking vaccines with autism. Of course, anyone can put together a list that even cherry picks information or takes things out of context that might supposedly back their claim, but in this case, it blatantly does not. And when I went to this account on Instagram, there were multiple other comments from other users saying, like, wait a minute, I went to see this paper on this list, and it doesn't say that at all. And in fact, it says basically the opposite. So please take the time to vet your sources. I know that nobody wants to be proven wrong, but we need to be able to dissociate our ego from our beliefs. If I am proven wrong, you know, yeah, that can hurt, and like nobody wants to be humiliated, nobody wants to basically be proven wrong, especially in like a public forum. But when people are basing their, you know, tightly held beliefs on misinformation and making decisions based on that, like not vaccinating their kids or voting for certain people, this can do real harm in our personal lives and to society as a whole.